Hello and welcome to the Politics of Peterborough, the podcast where I chat with the people who have been elected to make decisions about our city and those who try to influence them. I'm your host, Dave Adcock. If you have any suggestions as to who you'd like to listen to on a future episode of the podcast, or have any questions you'd like to put to my guests, you can get in touch via Facebook or X at politicspboro, or send an email to politics.peterborough@hotmail.com. On with the show. My guest for this episode has spent much of his career in local government, but not as a politician. He's held senior roles focused on place, regeneration, transport, economic growth and public service improvement, including at councils in Barnsley and Rotherham. He's spent time outside of local government, working at the Audit Commission and the National Audit Office. In 2022, he was appointed Chief Executive of Peterborough City Council, becoming the first new person to hold the role in more than 2 decades. Matt Gladstone, welcome to the Politics of Peterborough.
Hello, welcome.
So just to start with, give us a bit of a sort of insight into your background and how you first got into working in local government.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a lad from Devon, grew up. Some of my family were farmers, some of them were in the police, some in the military. But my mum and dad were both in the health service. And actually, I suppose I was destined for like a career as a public servant. And I always recall the chat round at dinner around a lot of terminology around health, and I always thought I don't want to work in the health sector. But actually, I left university in Newcastle, so I went from Devon to Newcastle. I loved working up north, but I got a job in National Audit Office in London, and I was, I suppose, naturally inquisitive around how government works, and I was moved every 6 months into different government departments, and then I worked in Revenue Customs for quite a few years around their investigation intelligence work. But then I started having a family, and actually I thought it's not particularly family friendly. So I then got into the Audit Commission around investigation work with local authorities, housing benefit fraud. And actually that then got me into the world of local government, local authorities. And actually, probably growing up, I didn't really know much about what local authorities did. I knew what central government, but local authorities, very, very limited. And I think we are the front face of government, at a local level. And I hugely enjoy the role. It's hugely rewarding, and the nature, the variety and the impact we can have for local people is huge.
What was it that you attracted you to Peterborough City Council when you applied for the role?
I mean, Peterborough was in 2021, back end of when I was approached for the role. Government support and the recruitment consultants were after somebody with a fresh pair of eyes, good problem solving skills. Are you up for a challenge? And actually Peterborough found itself in informal intervention around its money and its governance and political situation, and it did need somebody to come in and just drive that in terms of their level of change, culture, ways of working, and also a huge entity of the council was shared with Cambridgeshire, and actually I needed to come in and just really shape that. So there was a huge opportunity. Felt very daunting as your first chief exec's role, but I'm really pleased in terms of the culture change and improvement. We've come out of that now. We've come out of intervention over sort of 2 years ago now, and I think we've made significant changes. It isn't all about the money. It's about the importance of priorities for local people, and Peterborough is on the up, and I can talk more about the economic growth and the trajectory of what's happening across the city, but it's incredible at the moment what's going on.
Were you ever tempted to go down the politician route rather than sort of the officer route?
No, I mean I've got family history with Gladstone as the sort of politics side, but no, I'm apolitical, so I'm very neutral in terms of the political situation. And actually in Peterborough, I work with all politicians. We have a coalition at the moment, and I think they're doing a really great job in terms of leading the level of change. Shabina is the leader of the council, Labour leader, and I think she's been here about 6-7 months as leader, and she's coming with a huge mandate around that passion for the city and that drive. And in my job as the head of paid service is to manage the staffing side, the organisational structures, the capacity, and basically implementing those priorities set down by the politicians.
Sort of going on to that, what for everyone that kind of looks at the council and thinks, okay, well, we've got this chief executive. What is your day-to-day job? What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
I mean, my day-to-day job is in very simple terms, strategically, is to make sure we're focused on the top priorities for the council. And we have 4 priorities: children and young people services, prevention, independence and resilience, basically keeping people safe, driving the economy, and actually making sure we're in the spirit of the law, a sustainable future council, which is about managing the finances, the governance, and embracing new ways of working, new technology. So my job as the most senior member of staff on the officer side is to make sure we're structured appropriately, we're delivering in line with the legislation. And every week, you ask about the typical week, every week I get updates and new changes in legislation, literally 30 or 40 changes a week. But my day job is hugely varied. So if I even give you a snapshot in the last, say, 24 hours, I was doing a business event yesterday morning around about 300 businesses with the Chamber of Commerce, talking around the growth, business confidence, investment. And in particular, I touched on about how can businesses help the work we do around young people, around more vulnerable, fostering, caring, and in particular giving young people, work placement opportunities, internships and support. We're the number one fastest growing city for young people in the whole country. So that's a real opportunity. I was then chairing a resilience forum around our emergency response with police, fire, health. That's a strategic board looking at incidents like the Huntington train incident that we had to deal with a few months back with the police and emergency services. And then I had the joys of a leaders meeting with the local government reorganisation on the agenda and looking at how we work with the politicians and the chief executives across the region. This morning I was chatting to MenCap chief executive around the work we're doing around learning disability and what we can do differently to help provide supported living accommodation for people with learning disabilities. And every week I always try and get out and about on the ground to see the staff, the services that we're delivering. And I was really pleased to see that we had an awards ceremony and our reuse scheme, and in conjunction and partnership with Queensgate, they got highly commended at the National Awards this week. So it's just the nature and breadth of what we do is probably still misunderstood by the public at times, but we are, in simple terms, the front face of government at a local level.
I think a lot of people would have the view that your role is essentially just management of those internally with the council, but it sounds like there's actually a lot of work that's involved externally as well.
Yeah, it's probably 50% is external. So I would say pretty much everything that we do, whether it's services, policy discussions, and areas of focus, we have to deliver in partnership. Whether it's looking at supporting a vulnerable child, safeguarding matter, we have to work with police, health, education, GPs, etc. all the time. We look at how do we develop and grow the economy. So we're looking at like the station quarter scheme at the moment. It's a biggest scheme in the whole country. There are a number of different landowners. I've got Network Rail, I've got LNER, I've got government, I've got the combined authority. So there's a number of players to help deliver that scheme, and it's complex. And part of my job is to actually try and make it simpler and demystify some of that and make sure we're delivering in line with that agenda. So I would say everything that we do is in partnership, and we're always developing the relationships, particularly with the community and voluntary sector. I need volunteers. I need people to support things like fostering, and I need employers to give people time off so that they can embrace adoption and fostering. It's really important. Schools is obviously, there's a lot of academies now, but again, we have to work in partnership with the education system. I need better quality education standards to help give people opportunities for jobs and further learning.
Obviously, you're the head of the officer side of things, the internals in the council, and then we also have the elected 60 councillors as it stands. How do you see the relationship between those two bodies, and how does that work at its best?
I think at its best, and I think it's come a long way. We've done a lot of work to look at our governance structures and decision making. If nothing else, I'm working hard to make sure the politicians are collaborating. Doesn't mean they have to agree on everything, but I have a leader of the council and she selects her cabinet. And actually, as a returning officer, as part of my role, I obviously in charge of the elections, so I'm the one who has to stand up and say, well done, these are the votes and this is the winning candidate, and you've now been elected to serve as a councillor for the next number of years in Peterborough. So the elections and the democratic system is really important to my role, and I respect politicians are there to have a focus on the city. They want to see a difference, they want to make a difference, and it's where I have to work with all politicians from all parties to help guide them on that journey through advice in terms of decision making, advice in terms of conduct matters, governance issues, and we have a number of we have a cabinet system in Peterborough, which I think works really well. We have a scrutiny system, and we have a number of external bodies that the councillors will sit on to help guide our decision making. Ultimately, they're the ones making the decisions around spending the money, setting that direction around our corporate strategy and our key priorities.
How do you balance delivering the priorities of those elected councillors with the long-term stability of the councillors and organisation?
I think long-term stability of the organisation does come down to the financial position. And when I said when I first started, the finances were being scrutinised by government. We have now got a much stronger financial position over the next 3 years in terms of that outlook now, which is really positive. That's been down to a huge credit from the politicians of making some of those tough decisions, but also about you continually refining and re-looking at what are your top priorities. So whilst I've got 4 headline priorities, you're then looking at, so what does that mean? What's deliverable in the next sort of 2 or 3 years? And then my job is to then make sure I'm matching those resources and delivering against those priorities. So the collaboration happens a lot at full council. So when all the 60 councillors come together and are looking at, they can scrutinise the decisions which have been made by the cabinet over the last few weeks. They can scrutinise the combined authority decisions. They can call matters into question. They can have a debate on certain issues. And I think that's really important. That's done in a very transparent, public manner. And any of them can ask questions of each other, in effect.
One listener suggested that there's become a view that officers have become the real decision makers on the council, with elected councillors kind of being sidelined. What's your response to that?
My response is very clear. The politicians are the ones, they are effectively making the decisions. So we have a cabinet system, so every decision in crude terms above £500,000 goes to cabinet, or it's a fundamental policy decision which affects more than two wards. Or it could be a sensitive matter and you think actually it needs a proper consideration by cabinet. They're the ones making those decisions, not us officers. We might make recommendations and they will sometimes disagree with those recommendations, or they will say, well, thank you for the advice, but actually we want to tweak that, we want to do X, Y and Z. My job is to set out the implications, the opportunities, the risks around some of that. Is it in line with the law, which is really important? And is it in line with our priorities that we've set as a council? So politicians are the ones in the driving force behind that. And I think that has got stronger and stronger in recent years in terms of that passion and drive and what they want for the city. And I'm always encouraging them as a chief exec to help them sort of give that vision and direction, and then how they convey that to the wider partners and to the other politicians.
Why do you think that view is seen, that the officers might have more power than perhaps the councillors do? And what can the council do to kind of overcome or demystify that?
I think sometimes councillors they might not like the advice that we give them. And sometimes there might be limited options around what's the way forward. But they do have choices. They have choices about where they spend the money. There are some areas, though, where government will mandate and say, we're implementing this new scheme, and actually there isn't any wiggle room. That has to be implemented in that direction. I'll give you an example of, a recent example, the sports quarter. We closed the regional pool. Politicians have driven that to say, I want a new regional pool. The challenge was I didn't have £35 million. So we worked with the MP. This is how the political system works. To make the case into government, we got 20 million. So as a council, we've had to put more money in to deliver that. but there's a very cross-political support for a new sports quarter for the city. I could, as officers, to say, we haven't got that money, we haven't got the resources or the reserves to deliver that. But my job is to problem solve and to look at, they've given me a very clear intent, we want to do this. I have to then look at the ways and means to make that happen and making difficult choices behind the scenes to enable that to be delivered.
Now, in your time as Chief Executive, the council has had administrations with different political makeups. As you say, the current one, we have the coalition. I don't think you've had a majority. I think we were on a balance, where I think the Conservatives had 30 at most, but obviously a very strong minority. What's the differences you've noticed between those different types of makeup of the cabinet?
I think it is quite different. I mean, you touched on where I previously worked, but when I was in Barnsley, and it's changed recently, but they always had a very significant Labour majority, and that led to stable decision-making and stability on the political front in terms of that longer-term trajectory, in terms of what they want is in terms of the priorities. I actually think in Peterborough, I've worked across a number of different administrations. I've had, I think, 4 leaders in the last 4 years, but actually it hasn't blown us off course at all. We've been constantly focused around the 4 priorities, and our strapline is City of Opportunity, and I've had 100% endorsement from all politicians on that direction. So they might tweak and change and give slightly different emphasis, but working across a cross-political spectrum, if you like, I think is actually really good. So there's been discussions around being more transparent and open, and so I always strive for our decision-making to be in the public domain. We used to have a shareholder committee which is overseeing our commercial entities and arm's length bodies, for example, and I said that should be cross-political. I always recall when I first came in and I said, these decisions should be going to Cabinet. And they hadn't been in the past. And I said, no, these decisions have to be in the public domain. They're above £500,000. They should be going to Cabinet. And I took some flack for that as a chief exec. That was the advice. They didn't like it at the time. But actually, it's come full circle of having a really good, transparent approach around decision-making, which the public can see. They can ask questions. They can challenge it. And scrutiny, I think, has changed a lot around those more scrutinising of the decisions pre-cabinet as well now. We still want to do a bit more of that, without a doubt. But I think the cross-political spectrum, I think, has been a really good thing for Peterborough. And the political balance across a number of local authorities now, I think there's probably a good 50% of councils now are in no overall control. And we're not unique. There's nothing different there. And actually understanding how, as a chief executive, you have to work with that political landscape is important.
Council finances are often discussed in quite technical language. What would you describe Peterborough City Council's financial position as at this moment in time?
I would say our financial position is much more secure and stable. We have a budget of about £200 million, and our medium term over 3 years is balanced in terms of the government's fairer funding formula has been very beneficial to Peterborough. I think we were in the top 10 in terms of the increases in funding. But this was basically amending a formula which was based on a model in 2013. So I'm really pleased that the government has embraced that and has put more funding and investment into Peterborough. The budget, in very simple terms, is we collect taxes and revenue or government grants, and you're balancing that with dealing with the pressures around predominantly children's social care, adult social care, and things like waste and environment, flight tipping, antisocial behaviour. There are some pressure areas, and you have to balance those two out in essence. That's how we deliver those services. And then you look at what's important to local people based on consultation, how we set the council tax levels.
Now, one listener raised the level of council debt and the cost of servicing it. Who within the council is responsible for managing the debt and making sure that borrowing remains sustainable?
I mean, effectively, all the councillors. So all councillors are the ones who set the budget and agree the budget. And we've agreed that every year. That goes through our in February in terms of our budget setting process. So it's the councils who set that budget. Our council tax levels are actually some of the lowest in the country still. The levels of debt are still too high, but we have reduced that by 40 million in the last 12 months, which I'm really pleased about. But we could still do with reducing that down further because of the debt repayments. But as a council, you have a level of debt. We're a unitary council. We provide all the services in local government. So we're not a two-tier system like which you might touch on the local government reorganisation, but in actual delivery, we provide all those services, which is really important. And I think the financial position for the council is so much stronger now in terms of our asset position, debt levels coming down. And actually we have money to invest in things like the sports quarter, the station quarter development, and there's other investment that we have to put in continually around, say, children's homes and placements and support for some of the vulnerable people, without doubt.
How much ability does the council have to reduce the debt further, and what sort of timescales would there be on that?
I think the debt levels will take some time to come down, but again, I was really pleased with the impact of actually reducing it by 40 million. Our level of debt is about 485 million at the moment. It's come down significantly. But that debt has paid for new investment in schools, new investment in the roads, is some of the economic development and growth schemes. So it's significant. And one of them particularly is around our energy from waste plant, which actually costs tens of millions of pounds to build and develop. And that has saved us several £1 million over the last few years in terms of our waste streams. If we hadn't done that, the waste and disposal costs would have been absolutely huge. So that there was always a balance of investment and longer term savings. But I think the debt levels will come down over time, but our financial position is much stronger to be able to counter where we need to borrow. And we're much more, I think, savvy around where we invest our resources, and also where we're spending our decision making is done in a public, transparent manner. And I think that's why the big growth schemes at the moment are pivotal, like the station quarter of £50 million investment, the new university, ARU Peterborough. We had a stake in that. That was investment. That was government grant funding. Delivered it to budget, to time, and I'm delighted they're now already designing phase 4 of that university in the last 4 years. I don't know how they've quite done it on time, but we are a shareholder, stakeholder in that partnership, and that's been amazing for the city.
One constant topic that's raised online is the cost of senior officers at the council, and whether there are too many highly paid managers within the council. How do you respond to those concerns?
Our pay levels are openly in the accounts. They're publicised, they're agreed by the councillors. When I first came to Peterborough, we did a benchmark, and I brought in the Local Government Association to review our structures, and I actually removed a layer of directors to streamline that, because I felt there was too many layers. So if I'm honest, I probably agreed with the sentiment from the public there, that there was too many layers. It hadn't been looked at for a long time. There was some resistance to that, but I felt I needed to be very clear that actually we needed to set a standard expectation, and sometimes having too many layers can cause complications around decision-making and poor decision-making or confusion. We have a lean structure in place now with a chief executive, a single executive team, and then service directors, and then head of service, and they're delivering the services. Or actually, some other councils still have executive directors, assistant directors, service directors, and there's still a myriad there. We haven't got that in Peterborough anymore.
How do you maintain morale amongst council staff when the organisation is under financial pressure, but also under public criticism?
A number of ways. I mean, I think communicating all the fantastic work that we do 24/7, 365 days a year is incredible. We had our staff awards, and I would say it was by far the best we've done. 350 people for an hour or so to actually celebrate and showcase the amazing work. I mean, we've had people who have saved lives, They've gone into homes, they've gone into burning buildings, they've saved people's lives to make a difference. We've celebrated the work around social care, dealing with some of the most vulnerable kids in our city who are they might be missing from home for a few hours or days, and we find them, we support them, how we encourage fostering, how we encourage more independent living, if you've got to say learning disability, how we grow the economy, our waste teams on the ground, and giving that recognition is really important. But I think I spend a lot of time. I met the fostering team, bought them all a coffee, and suddenly about 25 of them turned up. But actually, they wanted time with me and my directors to understand how can I make their job better. They feel listened to. We have a staff survey where you said we do a lot of work to share that. I think the collaboration by the likes of Shabina as leader, the politicians, the cabinet members, regularly praising. We have values across the organisation around our respect and teamwork and integrity is really important, and living those values is really key. And I have tackled some areas of poor performance or where behaviours have not been good enough, and unfortunately some of those staff have been suspended or dismissed from the organisation, and I don't make any apologies for that. Sometimes when that's crossed the line, we are pretty tough in tackling those areas, and I think that's really important, because then if we don't tackle those issues, morale will suffer, because people will think, well, that's just the way it works right now, nothing happens. That's not the case at all. We've tackled that significantly.
Is recruitment and retention becoming more difficult within local council or local government in general, or specifically Peterborough?
I think I speak to councils, council leaders, businesses. It feels like everybody is struggling with recruitment challenges. But I also force people to think differently around how we recruit. So there are some jobs we get, one or two jobs and we get 100, 150 applicants. But I've also, going back to young people, we've got, I think it's 9 care leavers now working in the city. We had 0 probably 2 years ago. And I said, come on, where's our corporate parenting responsibilities? If they were my children, we will do everything we can to try and give them work experience, support, placements. I think recruitment, I would encourage anybody to get a job in local government. It's a tough gig, but the variety and the impact that you can make locally is huge. I've worked in central government. It's very different. You work in strategic policy, working with ministers, but you're working on national roles. I'm not going to say national government is poor. It's not. But locally, you can do so much more, and we're so much closer to, I see people in the city, and you think we've helped them. We get compliments. I go out on visits with our health visitors or our social care teams or our regen teams, and you know that you're having a difference. And you don't get that in some of the national roles. You don't get that in some of the health roles. So having that interface at a local level is so key. But we have 170 apprentices in the moment. We offer work placements, and we've been inundated with youngsters saying, I really wouldn't mind coming and do some work experience. So we're always looking at new ways of working. We're doing a lot with our black community at the moment around recruitment, and we did one with the Millennium House to really try new approaches around our recruitment, and it was absolutely fantastic working with health, police and others to really look at new ways of working for those placements. We've got a graduate scheme. I introduced that 3 years ago, and we're on our 3rd cohort now, and they're amazing. And almost all of them have said, I didn't know much about local government. They were all thinking of civil service jobs, and actually, no, on your doorstep. It's absolutely amazing. And we focus those now on Peterborough postcodes as well for graduates to come in from more the local area.
How does the council ensure that the voices and lived experiences of families raising children with disabilities are used to shape the services that they use, rather than just being heard after the problems have escalated?
Yeah, we do a lot of work on this around sort of co-production with families. It's really important that family voice, that children's voice is heard. So I've done a lot of work with Ofsted and others around our regulatory work and child protection arrangements and early help. the voice of the child is absolutely key. So, for example, recruitment around our senior officers, there are children and young people on the recruitment panels, without a doubt. We're doing a lot of work now called family group conferencing. So this is almost the sort of final step before you get into the sort of child protection litigation proceedings, is actually working with the children and families away from that legal aspects and that heavy social care dimension to say, look, what can we put in place to help support that? We've introduced that in the last 12 months. It's made huge strides in keeping children out of that legal process. We do a lot around children with disability, same on adults. We look at complaints, we look at compliments, and we get many. So it's all about a learning experience, and there's a lot of statutory quality assurance checks that we do on a regular basis through those cases as well. And equally, where I get as chief executive sometimes emails in say something's gone really well, but equally something that doesn't look right, I will challenge it, I'll prod it, I'll question it and think, have we done everything that we can to tackle that? And I regularly will meet children, families around what position is on the ground.
What do you think most affects public confidence in the council? Is it quality of services, the way decisions are publicised, communicated, the financial pressures, mistakes made, standards of behaviour, the tone of public debate?
See, I think the quality of our governance and decision making has been pretty damn good over the last few years. It wasn't in the past, and that was openly acknowledged by the government reports. If everyone wants to Google it, Google Peterborough City Council, the Improvement and Assurance Panel, there were a number of issues, but we've come so far now to tackle those issues. So I think the level and tone of debate at our council meetings, very constructive, very civil. They still might have disagreements on certain issues, and that's good for democracy. So I think the standard, if you like, the Nolan principle, standards of governance, standards of public life, are lived and breathed here in Peterborough. Our values approach around decision making, the values have been adopted for our staff, but also for councillors. We are thorough in investigating conduct issues in terms of councillors and for staff, which I think is really important. I think the level of transparency, though, I think is really important, because people might think if it's in a private or exempt item, there might be some commercial aspects to it. Often, officers are trying to do the right thing, but they might then put too much information in that exempt item, and myself and my director of legal will say, no, you don't need to put as much information in, that should be transparent. You don't need to put all the commercial aspects, because I get that can be sensitive, but actually the numbers involved do need to be in the public domain. So very rare now are exempt items going through into our system, unless there's maybe a police investigation to a certain matter that is then it's subject to criminal proceedings, etc. But in terms of the work we do on a routine basis, that's done in a very transparent, public manner, and anybody can ask questions. But I think the public still get confused about what local government does. So you have like a complexity of parish councils, local authorities. In the Cambridgeshire region, you've got district councils, you've got county council. We're not like that. We're just a unitary council, good old Peterborough City Council. We do all those services. So it's much simpler. So that's why I'm excited by local government reorganisation, because it will simplify the landscape politically and for the structures of what we serve. But in simple terms, we deliver all those services front-facing for government. We are the front-facing local aspects of how government is driving its policy agenda on the ground at a local level. And then we work in partnership with a number of different players, from business, other government bodies and the voluntary community sector.
Former councillor Daisy Blakemore-Creedon said in her resignation statement that she'd witnessed a culture where power could too easily go unchecked. Without asking you to comment on those specific circumstances, how do you respond to concerns about whether councillors feel supported and able to raise issues safely?
Yeah, we have a very extensive member development programme, I have a number of the politicians with mentors and support from other councils. I've encouraged lots of our councils to go and see how other councils operate through the Local Government Association, which is in a huge network around peer mentoring, reviews, assurance reviews, etc. And I'm really pleased to see a number of our councils do take that up now in terms of the leadership, academies and support. We do have, I would say, a healthy level of interface with my Director of Legal in terms of sometimes a lot of them, they're very small scale stuff. I didn't quite like how she or he spoke to me in that meeting or whatever, but they're often not about personal stuff. They're about the political debates, and that's where there can be clashes. So a lot of them there's no substance to them, but we do look at them, and that's where we do have an investigations process to look at those conduct issues. Where there are matters which are into a sort of more police side, that will get flagged and that will get looked into as we see fit, but those have been very exceptional. So I think the governance and standards of our politicians have been very good. All the debates and councillor support, training and development has been really good. It's been overhauled by the democratic team, and I think the level of support to our councillors is second to none now. And I think they all have an opportunity. I meet any councillors. I meet all the group leaders on a monthly basis. I have the group leaders together around on a monthly basis as well, talking around issues, concern, what's coming up at the next full council meeting, what's coming up in the cabinet meeting, but also just flagging, if there's a concern, they can raise it with me or my Director of Legal or any of our key members of staff at a senior level.
As you mentioned, there have been reports in recent times of former councillors, former officers who have been arrested in relation to past council decisions. Again, not going into specific cases, but what has changed in terms of the council's governance, oversight and decision-making process to strengthen public confidence that that kind of situation won't happen again?
I mean, my as I touched on earlier, my very clear mandate when I came in, I had a report which was presented around poor decision-making, poor governance, poor leadership, and the financial management of the council was in a bit of a mess. And I'm not making that up. That's all in the reports in 2021 from government. But I worked with Wayne Fitzgerald as the Conservative leader, worked with all the group leaders, and what was really powerful is we all said, we're going to sort this. And we've had unparalleled support from all the group leaders to be more open and transparent, to make sure our decision-making is done in a public manner, that it isn't signed off on a multi-million-pound contract and then think, well, how was that done then? There has to be decision-making done in a public manner. So Cabinet is the main route for that, for big decisions. £500,000 plus sounds a lot of money, but we can have several decisions going through which can be tens of millions of pounds. Those were not done, in my view, in a proper, transparent manner or in line sometimes with legislation. So that's the reason why we've had to really grip that and make sure we're doing it in a proper manner. And I'm really pleased. So all the sports quarter, the station quarter, the university schemes, the highways contracts, for spend 10, 11 million pounds a year on our roads, all the combined authority work, all of that is communicated and agreed through our cabinet system. And it's full scrutiny. We have an audit committee which is overhauled, actually, which is really important, with 3 independent members on there to help drive that accountability, decision making. And I think you have to, as a council, you have to open up and be receptive to that external challenge and feedback. And that's where I felt, I've seen it in other places where they've been in a similar position to Peterborough and they can still be fighting that external challenge. Oh, they've got it all wrong. The inspector's got it all wrong. We're not like that. We listen to that feedback and think, right, we need to make some improvements there and let's get on with it. And we've done that time and time again on lots of different fronts, whether it's Ofsted, Care Quality Commission, government, audit, etc. It's really important to learn. We can make mistakes. You have to learn from those and put things better.
in recent times, perhaps less so now, but there's still a significant number of independent councillors on the council. What support do you put in place for those who don't have the political group structure around them to help?
I mean, I'm really pleased. I think having a number of independent councillors is a good thing. I think they bring a fresh perspective as councillors. They all want to make a difference, in my view, at a local level. We are very inclusive, so those independent councillors are sat on a number of our different committees. We've just been having a debate around our corporate parenting and bringing in more independent councillors there. We have a financial sustainability working group, which is around, sounds a really boring title, but actually is around improvement, got all the aspects we've been talking about, improvement, governance, accountability, and we have independence on that group as well. So they have a really key role to play. They are able to access all the member development support as any councillor can have. I think the Local Government Association has changed its approach in terms of how it supports independent members as well, which I think is good. So yeah, I don't see any difference with whether you're affiliated to a group or an independent, or we have Peterborough First, who are made up of, they stand as independents, but they come together as a group. And there might well be some changes over the next few years as independents look at that, or whether they affiliate to a certain political group, but they have to come forward and declare that as a group for our purposes, for working out how we allocate the seats for different committees.
And obviously, the council publishes councillor attendance at the various meetings and committees, that kind of thing. Obviously, being a councillor is not a full-time job, but what level of attendance do you feel that residents should reasonably expect from their councillors across those formal council meetings?
I would expect all of our councillors to be pretty much at all those meetings, if I'm honest. There's been the odd occasion when I know there's one or two who've been quite close to, they haven't attended any for a few months. Sometimes there can be health and sickness aspects to that, and I get that. We've had one or two with cancer treatment and support, and I completely get that. We try to be flexible. But overall, I'd expect, same as the residents, they want us, I've elected these councillors, and it's a tough gig being a councillor. I think it's hugely rewarding. They make a real difference for our communities, and it's real important that they come together and also look at what's in the interest of the city. So if they're not at the meetings, their voice isn't being heard. So I would encourage any councillor to be involved, to have their say, to contribute, and share their thoughts and ideas of how we can make this city an even more prosperous city.
One listener asked about councillor allowances and whether residents should have clear, up-to-date information about what councillors receive. How important is that kind of transparency to residents?
I think I agree. Councillor allowances are set by an independent panel, and those recommendations are then taken to full council for approval, which they have done. So there is a lot of transparency around allowances. It can, again, people can get confused. Why on earth is so-and-so taking that amount of money? But there's a lot of time and effort a councillor has to put in. These are not 9-to-5 jobs. They work 365 days a year. They are on the front line. They are accessing a number of different vulnerable people. They are supporting their communities in a whole range of fronts. They're doing loads of fundraising. We put the community leadership fund. We gave councillors more money, so they can make a difference at a local level, which I think is really important. So I completely support councillors need to be rewarded and paid a suitable allowance. And as a cabinet member or as a leader of the council, you get paid a bit more in terms of that allowance. But I think that's completely commensurate with the role and the levels of responsibility. They're making big multi-million-pound decisions at the end of the day in the interest of the city, and I think they should be rewarded accordingly.
How do you personally deal with public criticism of the council?
We are alive to the public criticism of the council. I think overall, I feel we're doing a very good job in terms of the improvement and trajectory and delivery. The city has gone through a lot of change in recent years. We have a fundamental formal complaints procedure, which we take very seriously, and we get assessed on that by the Ombudsman, and we're doing really well in terms of that response there. Where we get it wrong, we will also hold our hands up and say, we will apologise and say, actually, we did get it wrong on that occasion. I think you have to recognise, though, you can't always please everybody. There are sometimes countering views, etc. I mean, I use an example around a controversial one, which is around the Wellington Fields sort of situation. It's been going on for 6 and a bit years. And it's been a very difficult, tense situation at times, with probably 2 or 3 camps in relation to whether it's the school, council, say Wellington Fields, etc. But a decision was made, taking into account all the facts at that cabinet, looking at it on balance. What's the advice from the legal position? What's in the interest of the children and young people here who haven't been able to, play safely in that playground? And I think we've made the right decision now. And I think sometimes you have to take those brave decisions and break that impasse. I was not happy that we were going to allow it for like another 6 years for those children to not be able to play safely. It's only one of the tiny schools in the country where that was not possible. So I think it just gives an illustration of how you get competing demands on the council. So I was not saying it's criticism, but they're different views around, well, I would have done it like that, but actually we have to do it like that. We have to do it in a transparent manner. So we do deal with complaints. We do deal with it. There's opposition to certain views. But that's the whole point of having a democratic system, which is done in a very open, transparent manner, openly elected. We have a very thorough elections process to make sure it's safe and transparent, and we want people to vote. It's come and have your say in your local area, what's important to you.
How do you and the council as a whole weigh up the balance of what's financially right for the city against what's potentially right for the community at large?
In terms of legislation, procurement decisions, driving value for money, these are not decisions all about money. Value for money isn't about just the money and the financial aspects. It's about quality, it's about effectiveness, it's about impact. It is about local people, end of the day. So we take all of those matters into account when we're making any of these decisions. When you look at any of our decisions going through our cabinet system, financial aspects is one area, but we also look at the legal aspects, we look at equalities, we look at a whole range of different aspects in relation to those decisions in the round. And as I said earlier, sometimes councillors will disagree with the recommendations coming forward and actually say, well, on balance, we'd like to do this or we'd like to change it and we're going to do that instead. That's absolutely fine. As officers, we're there to advise them that they can take alternative actions, and that's absolutely fine.
Now, you mentioned earlier, local government reorganisation is a major issue for councils across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Firstly, what specific problem is that reorganisation intended to solve?
I think reorganisation has been on the cards for quite a while. It predominantly affects the sort of southeast, east of England area and the sort of central area. So most of the country operates either on metropolitan areas, unitary councils, and you've got obviously London boroughs. But there's whole swathes of some of the rest of the country where there's a 2-tier system. So you have a county council and you have a number of district councils. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think there's opportunities for, I think, making it more cost effective, better value for money. And if I use the example of something like flooding and how you tackle flooding, there is probably a myriad of different organisations, all with responsibility around flooding, whether that's the highways bit of the county council area, you've got the district council doing support, you've got drainage boards, you've got parish councils, town councils. Very complex. And I think, if nothing else, is to simplify so one council in pretty much is responsible for all of that. You're still going to have, by the way, parish councils, and I think that's a really good model for taking local responsibility with a precept of taking delivery around real local issues and make a difference. But having a council like Peterborough is, we can influence anything in Peterborough, pretty much. Working with different players and partnerships. It's under one organisation through my leadership. It's under the political leadership, and we can control and influence so many different things. and we can do it so much more quickly, in my view, than operating in a two-tier system. But I wouldn't want to criticise two tiers. It's just that I think it's been talked about for a long time. There's got to be a better way. It doesn't make sense. The public do not understand it. When, in terms of refuse or roads, well, that's the county council, but we don't do that. That's the district council. It doesn't make any sense to the public's eyes. Whereas going back to my mantra, local government is local. We deliver that for Peterborough.
As you say, Peterborough is already a unitary authority. So how does that affect the way the city is approaching this reorganisation compared to those areas which are or do have two tiers of government?
I think we're very sensitive and aware that there are mixed views. There's 4 options on the table. The government's due to make a decision in July. I hope they do make a decision in July, so we can all move forward. I think it's slightly different for Peterborough because we are a unitary council, so we know what a unitary council, what that means and does, and our geography will probably expand. Whereas if you are a county council or district council, we're all getting abolished in a couple of years' time, but the structure will be different. And I think the geography for Peterborough will merely aggregate and expand and take into account some of those county council services and district council services into some of our area. Whatever that geography will be, we will make it work. It might be complex in some areas, but we're pragmatic. We've done it before, and I think it's a really exciting opportunity for businesses, for residents to deliver a better value for money, services at a local level.
So looking ahead to once this decision has been made and we've got this change, what does a successful outcome for Peterborough look like once LGR is complete?
I think once LGR is complete, it's not. LGR is going to be more like a 5-year transition. There's a lot of opportunity to transform some of those services at that 2-tier level. But I think someone like Peterborough is going through a huge growth agenda at the moment. We are in the top 4 or 5 for growth, population growth, business growth. We were thinking the State of the Region report last week, 31% growth, beating Cambridge, which I thought was amazing. It's nice to see as a counterbalance for that Cambridge effect. But I think the opportunities for working with a combined authority and delivering even more investment and change for the city, I think is absolutely key. So a really even stronger university, development around the embankment sites. We've got opportunity zones talked about in the city centre. We've got a new place partnership with Homes England and the combined authority to deliver an investment. I think it's incredibly powerful. We've got a new leisure quarter that will be finished in the next few years. It won't take that long to build a leisure centre, hopefully. I think that's an incredible game changer for the city. So I think local government reorganisation will mean you're working with fewer players. So if it's, say, 2 or 3 councils in the region, that's probably a lot easier than working with 7 councils. Working with the voice into government will be stronger through the mayor, Paul Bristow, and whichever mayor is in the future. I think having that structure is simpler, and we can articulate more around our asks and priorities into government, which is so key. And I think also the business confidence. The businesses want to know, who do I need to speak to? How can I influence? How can I make a difference? I want to do business in your patch. I think having some key direct interfaces with the business community in particular can make a real difference. So I think LGR is a real good opportunity for the region.
Now, not to put you on the spot, and you may not have made any decisions, but do you see yourself working within the new structure, or whatever it might be?
Absolutely. It's a really good opportunity. I think LGR is going to go through a lot of change. We will have to apply for our jobs, so it's a tricky area personally, but and they will be opened up nationally. But yeah, we will have to apply for the role, so we'll see what happens. But I'm hoping government will make a decision in July, and I hope they don't go back and say, can you go back and change that boundary? I'd much rather just let's stick to the decision now and let's crack on.
We had elections for 18 seats across the council last month, which initially were postponed because of their impact on LGR, but then the decision was taken by central government to reintroduce those. We've now got a second by-election of the year taking place in Fletton and Woodston. What impact will that election have on the council's ability to provide other services?
I think at the minute the impact is fairly minimal. This is fairly routine for us. We have occasionally by-elections. We've had, unfortunately, deaths from councillors, and we have to have a by-election as that gets called. So I will be the returning officer for that election again. The elections team are very capable here. They know the business. And it's not just about a small core team. There's a number of people who have to, get the arrangements together, setting out the tables, the voting during the day, postal voting. There's a lot of stuff which happens behind the scenes on an election. Really, I would urge anybody to get involved in the election. But it's really good to see how democracy works. But in terms of the impact, it is largely for a few days. So it's very minimal. And I hugely appreciative of staff and volunteers who get involved to help us out with the election, because it is really important. But no, it's not going to have a big impact on our day-to-day services.
So as we begin to draw this to a close, where do you think the council has made the most progress in improving how it works, and where do you think it still needs to improve further?
I think there's probably 2 or 3 areas. I think in terms of our children's services, we had a difficult rating a few years back, and I think we've made some huge changes around our approach around safeguarding. We've got a state-of-the-art multi-agency safeguarding hub, so where there's any concern across the city, that comes into a multi-agency manner with police, public health visiting teams, domestic abuse, etc. That is looked at very thoroughly. We've got a house project for care leavers to give support around independent living into the permanent accommodation. Our adult social care services have been good rated and were some of the best in the country. But they're doing some amazing stuff around digital and technology and how they can support carers to be much more independent, and that support going in is good. I think the growth and regen is now really kicking in. We've always been high on, top 10 startups, high population growth, really strong business growth. So the East of England is doing really well. We do have our challenges around young people, out of work, etc., but that's starting to shift quite a bit. I think I was at the business event yesterday, reeling off, MGS are doing the flats across the riverside, a new bridge coming in early next year, station quarter scheme now on site to provide a new western access, providing development sites for growth, investment and jobs, I think is really exciting. Anglia-Ruskin University, Peterborough College, Green Tech Centre, all open to budget, to time. So there's loads of it which has happened, which is delivered in the last few years, which I'm really proud about. We have got a very exciting one coming up in the next few months around a new youth zone for Peterborough. So we're making the case that we've put to the politicians very shortly. And I think that's probably what I'm most excited about for young people as a proper investment on the embankment potentially. And I think there's lots to go at still. But the growth and the impact has been massive. And then going back to your early comments around how we do our business, I do think the culture and our huge praise for our staff, politicians, the way we do our business is very different. And I'm hugely proud as a chief executive in terms of that level of turnaround and that focus around our sort of priorities, but doing our business in a much more transparent, in a good governance. I make no apologies. We have to do it in a good governance manner as well, which is what the public expect.
Finally, if residents take one thing away from this conversation about Peterborough City Council, what would you want it to be?
I think our strapline is City of Opportunity. So I think we are a very ambitious place. We're ambitious for the city. And I think that has to remain. As I'm always saying to politicians, stop looking at the here and now. Actually, where do you want to be? Where's the next focus? What's the key things that you really want to get across the line? So I'd say ambition without a doubt.
Matt Gladstone, thank you for joining me on the Politics of Peterborough podcast. And that's it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks to Matt for joining me. Make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts so you get each episode as soon as it's released. You can find us on X and Facebook at PoliticsPBORO. Please let me know what you thought of the episode. If you have any suggestions as to who you'd like to hear on the show, or any questions you'd like me to put to our guests, You can email us at politics.peterborough@hotmail.com. This episode of The Politics of Peterborough was created, hosted, recorded and edited by me. I'll see you next time.